The nutrient slop landed in her bowl with a wet slap, beige, lumpy, and smelling vaguely of synthetic protein. It had been scientifically formulated to provide exactly 2,300 calories of nutritionally adequate biomass for a human female of her height and weight. Station Aurora 9 was nothing if not efficient in its treatment of designated prey species. "Consume within 20 minutes. Dr. Lin," chirped the dispensary drone. "Failure to finish your ration will result in a nutrition violation." Dr. Mara Lin stared at the gelatinous mass. Her doctorate in xenobiology, utterly useless in making the slop more appealing. 6 months ago, she had been Earth's leading expert on interspecies diplomatic relations. Now she was little more than livestock in the eyes of the hegemony, the ruling council of predator species that controlled this sector of space. 14 minutes remaining, the drone reminded her. Mara sighed and spooned a glob into her mouth, suppressing her gag reflex. Around her, in the sterile white cafeteria, other humans and assorted prey species hunched over identical bowls. They ate quickly, quietly, their movements small and efficient, behaviors that had been conditioned through months of subtle and not-so-subtle intimidation. "Attention all Prey Wing residents," came the smooth, manufactured voice of Station Administrator Grix through the overhead speakers. "Today's mandatory briefing will commence in 30 minutes. Attendance is compulsory. Absence will result in privilege reduction." The privilege reduction was a euphemism for having your already limited food rations cut in half or your 8x10 sleeping pod reduced to a standing capsule. Mara had seen it happen to a Luridian diplomat who had questioned the classification system too loudly. Aurora 9 was supposed to be a neutral diplomatic outpost, a place where hundreds of species could negotiate treaties and trade agreements in peaceful coexistence. In reality, it was a cosmic DMV where the fundamental organizing principle was the predator-prey hierarchy. The moment humanity had made contact with the wider galactic community, they had been evaluated, categorized, and filed away as prey, despite their technological achievements and complex civilization. The reasoning was simple. Humans lacked natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no reinforced exoskeletons or crushing mandibles. Therefore, prey. End of discussion. Mara finished her slop with 5 minutes to spare and handed her bowl to the recycling unit. As Earth's representative xenobiologist turned reluctant diplomatic observer, she had spent 6 months documenting the subtle and not-so-subtle ways the station's architecture, procedures, and social norms reinforced the hierarchy. Her reports back to Earth were filled with detailed observations and growing frustration. She made her way through the crowded corridors toward Briefing Room C, a route that deliberately took her past the wide, comfortable hallways of the Predator Wing. Through transparent barriers, she could see members of the apex species lounging in spacious common areas, enjoying freshly prepared meals and engaging in animated conversation. The contrast with the crowded utilitarian prey quarters couldn't have been more stark. The briefing room was already packed when she arrived. Beings of all shapes and sizes, some with feathers, some with scales, some with translucent skin through which internal organs pulsed visibly, were crammed onto bench seating. All prey, all treated with the same institutional disdain. Administrator Grix, a tall, slender being with glossy black exoskeletal plates and 4 manipulator limbs, stepped onto the small platform at the front of the room. Unlike the previous briefings, which typically consisted of new restrictions and regulations, Grix seemed almost excited today. "Esteemed delegates," Grix began, using the formal address that everyone knew was mere lip service. "The Hegemony Council is pleased to announce a special ceremonial event to commemorate 12,000 years of galactic order under the classification system." The room remained silent. Special events on Aurora 9 had a way of being particularly humiliating for the Prey Wing residents. The first bite ceremony is a traditional observance dating back to the earliest days of interspecies contact, Grix continued, mandibles clicking, with what Mara had learned to recognize as pleasure. One representative from the prey classification will be selected to enter Arena Delta, where they will receive the ceremonial first bite from an apex predator, demonstrating the natural order that has brought peace and stability to our galactic community. A murmur of alarm rippled through the room. Mara felt her stomach clench. The bite is symbolic, of course, Grix added, almost as an afterthought. Medical supervision will be provided to ensure no permanent damage occurs. How generous, Mara muttered under her breath. The Luridian beside her shot her a warning glance. The prey representative will be selected by random lottery, Grix announced, producing a glowing orb that pulsed with soft blue light. Each species currently classified as prey will have one entry. The orb rose from Grix's manipulators and hovered in the center of the room, spinning faster and faster until it became a blur of blue light. Then, abruptly, it stopped and projected a holographic symbol, the Earth glyph. The human delegation has been selected, Grix announced, with what sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. Please choose your representative by the end of the station's day cycle. As the briefing dispersed, the other human delegates, a trade negotiator, a cultural attaché, and 2 junior diplomatic officers, gathered around Mara in a tight huddle. "This is outrageous," hissed Eliza Dung, the cultural attaché. "We should file a formal protest." "Like the Luridians did, or the Parathians," Mara replied. "You saw what happened to them." "We can't just offer one of us up to be bitten," said trade negotiator Quan, his face pale. Mara stared past them, through the transparent barrier that separated the briefing room from one of the predator lounges. A group of apex species were watching them, with what could only be described as amusement. One of them, a massive being with crimson scales and retractable claws, made a biting motion in their direction. Something hardened in Mara's chest. 6 months of degradation, of watching other species being systematically humiliated, of sending reports that seemed to disappear into a void. 6 months of being treated as less than sentient because she lacked natural weapons. "I'll do it," she said, her voice cutting through the panicked discussion. "Mara, no," began the junior officer, a fresh-faced kid named Thomas, who still believed in diplomatic solutions. "I said I'll do it." Mara turned to face them fully. Her decision made. "I'm the xenobiologist. I understand their physiology better than any of you, and I've studied their cultural rituals." What she didn't say was that she had also been covertly studying their weaknesses. Every predator had them, even apex ones. It was basic evolutionary biology. Specialization always came with trade-offs. "Dr. Lin," Eliza started, then trailed off, seeing the determination in Mara's eyes. "Inform Administrator Grix of our decision," Mara said, already walking away. "I have preparations to make." Back in her cramped sleeping pod, Mara pulled out her secured data tablet, one of the few pieces of Earth technology she'd been allowed to keep. She opened a hidden folder labeled Comparative Physiology Notes and began reviewing her extensive files on the apex predator species, paying particular attention to their bite mechanics, pressure thresholds, and nervous system vulnerabilities. If they wanted a ceremonial bite, she would give them something to remember. The next morning, Mara declined her nutrient slop, knowing that an empty stomach would be an advantage. She dressed in the standard-issue prey wing jumpsuit, but made a few subtle modifications: reinforced padding at key points, hidden pockets for the small tools she'd managed to smuggle past security. A message flashed on her communication band. "Arena Delta, 1400 hours. Medical preparation required at 1300 hours. Medical preparation. They probably wanted to inject her with coagulants to ensure she didn't bleed too much during the spectacle. Fine. She had accounted for that possibility. At exactly 1300 hours, Mara presented herself at the medical bay, where a team of arthropodal medical technicians waited with an array of instruments. Species: human. Classification, prey. Procedure, first bite, preparation, recited the head technician, whose name badge identified them as Dr. Tsick. Please remove outer garment and extend left forearm for injection. Mara complied, watching carefully as they administered a cocktail of coagulants, mild analgesics, and what her enhanced contact lenses identified as a mild sedative. Interesting choice. They wanted her calm but conscious. Procedure complete, Dr. Tsick announced. You will be escorted to Arena Delta. Remember, the first bite is an honor. The ceremonial wound will heal within days and will be considered a mark of distinction among your kind. Will it? Mara asked, her voice deliberately neutral. Dr. Tsick's compound eyes blinked in what might have been confusion. Of course. To be chosen by an apex predator is to be recognized in the great chain of being. Mara simply nodded and allowed herself to be led through a series of security checkpoints toward Arena Delta. With each step, the corridors grew wider, the ceilings higher, the materials more luxurious. She was entering the heart of the Predator wing. Arena Delta was a vast, circular chamber, with tiered seating rising in concentric rings around a central platform. The seats were filled with members of various predator species, from the massive apex hunters to the smaller, pack-oriented predators that occupied the middle tiers of the classification system. The lighting was subdued, creating dramatic shadows that emphasized the ceremonial nature of the proceedings. Administrator Grix stood at a podium overlooking the central platform, flanks gleaming with ceremonial oils. Esteemed hunters and honored guests, Grix's voice boomed, amplified by the chamber's perfect acoustics. We gather today to honor 12 millennia of peace under the classification system, established by the wisdom of our ancestors who recognize that order comes from acknowledging the natural hierarchy of all sentient beings. Mara was positioned at the edge of the platform, a small figure in the standard gray jumpsuit that marked her as prey. She scanned the crowd, noting the various species and their positions in the hierarchy. At the highest tier sat the Supreme Council members, the eldest and most powerful of the apex predators. The first bite ceremony reaffirms the bonds that unite our diverse species, Grix continued. By accepting their place in the natural order, the prey demonstrates wisdom and submission to greater forces, and the predator demonstrates restraint and governance, the very foundations of our civilization. A low, appreciative rumble moved through the crowd. Mara remained still, her face carefully blank despite the burning anger in her chest. To perform the sacred first bite, the Council has selected Rakthal of the Crimson Hunters, whose lineage traces back to the founding of the hegemony itself. From the highest tier, a massive figure rose and began descending toward the central platform. Rakthal was even more imposing up close, nearly 7 feet of corded muscle covered in crimson scales that shimmered like liquid metal under the arena lights. A ridge of black spines ran from the crown of his head down his back, and his eyes were vertical slits of amber that seemed to glow with internal fire. Mara recognized him as the predator who had made the mocking biting gesture the day before. How fitting. Rakthal approached with the confident grace of an apex hunter, his movements deliberate and powerful. He circled Mara once, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. The human female accepts the first bite, Grix announced. Let the ceremony commence. Rakthal stopped directly in front of Mara, towering over her. His jaws parted slightly, revealing rows of serrated teeth designed for tearing flesh. According to protocol, Mara was expected to extend her arm, offering it for the ceremonial bite. Instead, she looked directly into those amber eyes. I have a question before we proceed. A murmur of surprise rippled through the arena. Prey didn't ask questions during ceremonies. Rakthal's head tilted slightly, curiosity momentarily overriding annoyance. Speak, human. The first bite is meant to demonstrate the natural order, Mara said, her voice clear and carrying across the suddenly silent arena. "But I'm curious. Have you ever studied how humans hunt?" Confusion flickered across Rokthal's reptilian features. "Humans do not hunt. You are gatherers and scavengers. This is established taxonomy." Mara smiled slightly. How interesting that a civilization spanning 12,000 years could be so fundamentally misinformed. Before Rokthal could respond, Mara extended her left arm, the one that had received the medical preparation. "You may proceed with the ceremony. I consent to the first bite." Something in her calm demeanor seemed to unsettle the Crimson Hunter. But protocol demanded he continue. With a low growl that might have been meant to intimidate, Rokthal bent his massive head toward her exposed forearm. Mara felt the pressure as those powerful jaws closed around her flesh, the serrated teeth pressing against her skin but not yet breaking it. This was the moment of theater, the predator showing restraint, demonstrating civilization's triumph over base instinct. Then, with precise control, Rokthal increased the pressure just enough to break the skin, creating the ceremonial wound that would leave a scar but cause no serious damage. The assembled predators watched in approval, witnessing once again the reinforcement of the natural order. What they didn't expect was Mara's reaction. Instead of the expected flinch, gasp, or whimper that usually accompanied the first bite, Mara observed the process with clinical detachment. As Rokthal released her arm and straightened, clearly expecting to see fear, or at least respectful awe, she examined the bite mark with the critical eye of a scientist. "Interesting technique," she said, her voice carrying in the hushed arena. "Your lateral incisors applied approximately 42% more pressure than necessary for ceremonial purposes. The angle of penetration suggests a slight misalignment in your lower mandible. Third molar, left side. I believe you might want to have that examined." Rokthal blinked, his vertical pupils contracting to thin lines. "Additionally," Mara continued, dabbing at the small amount of blood with a cloth she'd produced from a pocket, "the serration pattern of your dentition suggests adaptation for severing tendons rather than crushing bone. Efficient for taking down large prey that you've already exhausted through pursuit, but rather specialized. I imagine it would be quite disadvantageous against certain types of opponents." A different kind of murmur moved through the arena now. Confusion mingled with disbelief. Prey didn't analyze predators. Prey certainly didn't critique their hunting adaptations. Administrator Grix stepped forward hurriedly. "The ceremony is complete. The human has received the first bite and—" "Oh, I'm not finished," Mara interrupted, her voice pleasant but firm. "Since we're celebrating 12 millennia of the classification system, I thought this would be an excellent opportunity for some scientific exchange." She turned to address the wider audience, deliberately turning her back on Rokthal, a gesture that caused several gasps from the lower tiers. "You've classified humans as prey, based on our lack of natural weapons," Mara stated. "No claws, no venom, no crushing jaws. A reasonable assessment at first glance. But it's incomplete data that has led to a critical classification error." The Supreme Council members stirred in their elevated seats, multiple eyes focusing intently on the small human female who dared to challenge 12,000 years of taxonomic certainty. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters," Mara continued. "We lack the speed and natural weapons of ambush predators like Rokthal, so we developed different adaptations: endurance, thermal regulation through sweating, and enhanced pattern recognition." She began to pace the platform, her movements deliberate and controlled. "We didn't need to be the fastest or the strongest. We simply needed to outlast our prey, to keep pursuing until they collapsed from exhaustion. It's a hunting strategy that requires patience, intelligence, and cooperation, qualities your classification system seems to overlook." Rokthal had recovered from his initial surprise and now loomed behind Mara, his posture radiating threat. Your evolutionary history is irrelevant. Human. You no longer hunt. You have no natural weapons. The classification stands. Mara turned back to face him, unflinching. Natural weapons are relative. Rakthal. What we lack in claws, we make up for in creativity. With that cryptic statement, she gave a small bow to the council. I thank the Hygameni for the honor of participating in this ceremony. I hope it has been educational for all involved. As she was escorted from the arena, Mara could feel hundreds of predator eyes following her exit. She had planted the first seed of doubt. Now she needed to nurture it. Back in the prey wing, Mara was met with a mixture of awe and concern from her fellow humans. Are you insane? Hissed Eliza, pulling Mara into a quiet corner of the common area. You just challenged the entire basis of the classification system in front of the Supreme Council. I presented scientific facts, Mara replied calmly, applying a regenerative patch to the bite wound. If they choose to interpret that as a challenge, that's their prerogative. They'll retaliate, warned trade negotiator Quan. They always do when someone questions the hierarchy. Mara nodded. I'm counting on it. But they won't do anything immediately. They're too surprised. They need to regroup, reassess. That gives us time. Time for what? Asked Thomas, the junior officer, his eyes wide. Education, Mara said simply. Tomorrow. I begin practical demonstrations. Over the next 3 days, Mara implemented her plan with methodical precision. Each morning, she would appear in different public areas of the station where prey and predator wings intersected, always within regulation, but positioned for maximum visibility. On the first day, she set up in the 0G training ring, ostensibly for approved exercise. What she actually did was demonstrate human endurance running, a modified version adapted for the reduced gravity environment. For 4 straight hours, she maintained a steady pace, her breathing controlled, her movements efficient. She knew the predators were watching through the observation windows, their confusion growing as this supposedly weak prey species showed remarkable stamina. On the second day, she moved to the agricultural dome, where she had been granted permission to study xenobotanical specimens. Instead, she demonstrated tool-making, using simple materials to craft surprisingly effective implements. A weighted sling, a sharpened staff, a set of bolas fashioned from cultivation weights and tether cord. Nothing that could be classified as a weapon under station regulations. But the implications were clear to any observer with a tactical mind. By the third day, word had spread throughout the station. When Mara appeared in the Communal Skills Center to demonstrate basic martial arts forms, officially classified as cultural exercise, a crowd of both prey and predator species gathered to watch. She moved through the ancient patterns of Aikido and Tai Chi, emphasizing balance, leverage, and the redirection of force rather than brute strength. After each demonstration, she would bow politely to her audience and return to her duties, as if nothing unusual had occurred. But throughout the station, conversations were changing, questions were being asked, assumptions were being examined. Late on the third evening, as Mara was returning to her sleeping pod, a slender figure stepped from the shadows of the corridor. It was a Varithian, one of the mid-tier predator species, known for pack hunting and strategic intelligence. This one wore the insignia of a council delegate. Dr. Mara Lin, the Varithian said, voice a melodious whisper. I am Delegate Vorith. We need to speak. Mara maintained a neutral expression. Official business should be conducted through Administrator Grix. This is not entirely official, Vorith replied, multifaceted eyes glinting in the low light. Your demonstrations have caused considerable discussion among the council. Some find them provocative. Scientific education is rarely comfortable, Mara said, especially when it challenges entrenched beliefs. Vorith's head tilted in what Mara recognized as a gesture of reluctant agreement. Nevertheless, There are those who feel you are deliberately undermining the classification system. I'm simply presenting additional data for consideration. And tomorrow, what data will you present then? Mara allowed herself a small smile. I've requested permission to use Arena Beta for a collaborative demonstration, a more comprehensive showcase of human hunting techniques, with volunteers from both prey and predator classifications. Vorith's breathing changed, a sign of surprise or alarm. The request will be denied. On what grounds? It falls within my rights as a diplomatic observer to organize cultural exchange activities. Rakthal has formally objected. He claims your activities are disruptive and potentially dangerous. Now it was Mara's turn to be surprised, though she hid it well. Interesting. I wouldn't have expected him to feel threatened by mere demonstrations. He is not threatened, Vorith said quickly, too quickly. He is concerned about station security. Of course, Mara nodded. Well, if my request is denied, I'll simply have to find another venue for tomorrow's demonstration. Perhaps the central concourse during peak traffic hours would be suitable. It's classified as public space, after all. Vorith's upper limbs made a subtle gesture of distress. That would be unwise. Would it? Why? The Vorithian delegate seemed to struggle internally, before finally saying, There is division within the council. Not all agree with Rakthal's assessment of your species. Some of us believe the classification system may benefit from periodic review and refinement. This was unexpected, a potential ally among the predator delegates. Mara decided to take a calculated risk. In that case, Delegate Vorith, perhaps you'd be interested in attending a private demonstration. Tonight, in Training Room E7. It's officially reserved for human cultural practice. Vorith hesitated, then gave the Vorithian gesture of agreement, a quick double click of specialized appendages. I will come, alone. Bring whoever you trust, Mara said. The more witnesses, the better. 2 hours later. Training Room E7 contained an unlikely gathering. Mara and Dr. Selvi Moran, the medical officer from the human delegation, Delegate Vorith, and 3 other mid-tier predator representatives, and, surprisingly, a junior member of the Crimson Hunters, a relative of Rakthal, who had introduced himself as Kaztar. Thank you all for coming, Mara began, standing in the center of the training mat. What I'm about to demonstrate may challenge some of your fundamental assumptions about species classification, particularly regarding humans. She nodded to Dr. Selvi, who activated a holographic display showing anatomical models of various predator species alongside a human model. Humans evolved on a planet with some of the most efficient predators in the galaxy, Mara explained. We survived not by outmatching them in strength or speed, but by developing a different kind of predatory strategy, one based on endurance, cooperation, and tool use. She moved to a table where she had arranged a collection of simple implements, a coil of rope, a weighted sled, a staff, and what appeared to be primitive throwing implements. What made humans dangerous wasn't our individual capabilities, but our collective ones, she continued. We hunted in groups, using coordination and communication to overcome physically superior prey. Kaztar, the young Crimson Hunter, made a dismissive sound. Tools are a sign of weakness, not strength. True predators rely on their natural gifts. Is that so? Mara asked mildly. Then perhaps you'd be willing to assist with a practical demonstration? The young hunter straightened, clearly eager to prove his superiority. What do you propose? A simple exercise in persistence hunting, Mara said. You will be the hunter. I will be the prey. If you can catch me within this training room in the next 30 minutes, you win. Kaztar's vertical pupils dilated with anticipation. And the conditions. You may use only your natural abilities. No technology. No weapons. I will use only what I have here. She gestured to the simple tools on the table. And Dr. Selvi will observe to ensure safety protocols are maintained. The young Crimson Hunter looked around at the relatively small training room, clearly calculating that the confined space gave him an overwhelming advantage. "I accept." What followed was a masterclass in human hunting adaptations. For 30 minutes, Mara evaded the increasingly frustrated Crimson Hunter, using a combination of endurance, tactical positioning, and improvised obstacles created with her simple tools. She never ran at full speed, instead maintaining a steady pace that forced Kaztar to expend energy in bursts of acceleration that gradually took their toll. By the 20-minute mark, the young hunter was showing signs of fatigue, his movements becoming less coordinated, his breathing labored. Mara, meanwhile, maintained the same controlled pace, her body temperature regulated through efficient sweating, her movements economical and precise. When the 30 minutes elapsed, Kaztar had not managed to corner his prey even once. "Impossible," he gasped, leaning against the wall as Dr. Selby offered him a hydration pack. "This room is too small for you to evade capture for so long." "That's the point," Mara said, barely winded. "Humans don't need to be faster or stronger. We just need to be smarter and more persistent." She turned to address the other observers, who had watched the demonstration with increasing amazement. "Now imagine this same scenario played out across miles of terrain, with multiple human hunters working in coordination, using environmental knowledge and communication to exhaust prey much larger and stronger than themselves." Delegate Vorth stepped forward, multifaceted eyes gleaming with new understanding. "You're suggesting that humans should be reclassified." "I'm suggesting that the entire classification system is flawed," Mara replied. "It categorizes species based on narrow criteria that fail to account for evolutionary adaptations like ours. Humans aren't apex predators in the traditional sense, but we're certainly not defenseless prey either." She walked to the center of the room, commanding attention without raising her voice. "What I'm proposing is a new classification, cooperative apex, species that achieve predator status not through individual prowess, but through collective action and intelligence." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Such a reclassification wouldn't just affect humans. It would require a fundamental restructuring of the entire hegemony hierarchy. "The Council will never accept this," Kaztar said, but his tone lacked conviction. "They might," Delegate Vorth mused, "if they saw a more comprehensive demonstration." "What did you have in mind?" Mara asked. "A grand reenactment," the Verithian delegate replied. "In Arena Delta, before the full council and representatives from all classifications. Show them exactly what humans are capable of when working together." Mara exchanged a glance with Dr. Selby, who gave a subtle nod. "It would need to be officially sanctioned," Mara said carefully, "and we would need guarantees of safety for all participants." "Leave the politics to me," Vorth said, making the Verithian gesture of commitment. "Prepare your demonstration. Make it impossible to ignore." 3 days later, Arena Delta was filled to capacity. Word had spread throughout the station about the human hunting exhibition, creating a buzz of anticipation that transcended the usual predator-prey divisions. Even Administrator Grix had been unable to deny the overwhelming interest, reluctantly granting official sanction after pressure from multiple council factions. The arena had been transformed into a simulation of Earth's varied terrains, sections representing grasslands, dense forest, rocky highlands, and marshy lowlands. Advanced holographic technology enhanced the physical features, creating a rich, immersive environment. Mara stood at the center of the arena, with Dr. Selby and the other human delegates, all dressed in simple garments, reminiscent of early human hunters. Around them, arranged in a semicircle, were volunteer prey, predator species who had agreed to participate in the demonstration, including, surprisingly, Kaztar. In the highest tier of seating, the Supreme Council watched with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Rockthal occupied his position of honor, his expression unreadable, but his posture rigid with tension. Administrator Grix stepped forward to begin the proceedings. Esteemed council members and honored guests, we are gathered for an unprecedented event, a cultural demonstration by the human delegation. While unusual, this exhibition has been approved in the spirit of scientific exchange and mutual understanding. The administrator's tone made it clear that they personally found the whole affair distasteful, but protocol demanded neutrality. Dr. Mara Lin will now explain the parameters of the demonstration. Mara stepped forward, her voice clear and confident as it carried throughout the arena. What you are about to witness is a recreation of how early humans hunted on Earth, before we developed advanced technology. This is not a theatrical performance. It is a scientific demonstration of evolutionary adaptations that have been overlooked in our current classification. She gestured to her fellow humans, who stood ready with their simple tools, spears with blunted tips, weighted throwing cords, and carrying satchels. Our volunteers will attempt to evade capture using their natural abilities, speed, strength, camouflage. My team will demonstrate human hunting techniques, persistence tracking, coordinated pursuit, and tactical tool use. No one will be harmed. All weapons are modified for safety, and medical staff are standing by. Mara looked directly at the Supreme Council, her gaze steady. I ask only that you observe with open minds and consider the evidence before you. With that, the demonstration began. The volunteer prey scattered across the simulated terrain, using their various evolutionary advantages to hide or outpace their human pursuers. What followed was a masterful display of human hunting capabilities, not the brute force or lightning strikes of apex predators, but something altogether different and, to many observers, unsettling. The humans moved with coordinated precision, using hand signals and environmental cues to track their quarry. They never sprinted at full speed, instead maintaining a steady, ground-covering pace that seemed to never tire. When a volunteer would burst away with superior speed, the humans would simply adjust their course and continue the relentless pursuit. Dr. Selvey demonstrated how humans use terrain to their advantage, herding prey toward natural bottlenecks where other team members waited. Mara showed how simple tools extended human capabilities, a thrown bola safely entangling the legs of a swift Caridian, a net cast to corner a climbing phoenix. But the most dramatic moment came when Kazatar, using his species' renowned speed and strength, thought he had finally escaped his pursuers by scaling a simulated cliff face. As he reached the top, clearly believing himself safe, he found Mara waiting, having taken a longer but less demanding route to the same position. Persistence, she said simply, touching him lightly on the shoulder with her blunted spear, the symbolic capture. By the end of the hour-long demonstration, every volunteer had been captured, at least once, and the arena had fallen into a stunned silence. It wasn't the spectacular violence of predator hunts that had impressed the audience, but rather the methodical, inevitable efficiency of the human approach. As the simulation terrain faded back to the standard arena configuration, Mara gathered her team at the center. This is how humans survived and thrived on a world filled with natural predators far more dangerous than ourselves, she announced to the silent crowd. We turned prey instincts, caution, observation, cooperation into predator art. We became something that didn't fit neatly into either category. She looked directly at Rockthal. We respect the hunting prowess of apex predators, like the Crimson Hunters. We don't claim to be stronger or faster, but we are not prey. We never were. The silence that followed was broken by Delegate Vorith, who rose from their seat in the mid-tier section. I move that the Council convene an immediate classification review based on the evidence presented today. Another delegate, a massive, tentacled being from the oceanic worlds, raised an appendage in agreement. Seconded, the Leviathan Collective supports review. Before any further discussion could occur, A piercing alarm sounded throughout the arena. Red emergency lights began flashing, and Administrator Grix's voice came over the announcement system. Security alert. All delegates return to assigned quarters immediately. Arena Delta is now under lockdown. This is not a drill. Armored security drones poured into the arena, forming a perimeter around the human team. Mara knew this was the critical moment. Either their demonstration had triggered a dangerous backlash, or the system was already beginning to adjust to new information. Humans will be escorted to secure observation, Grix announced, their voice tight with barely controlled tension. The Supreme Council has called an emergency session to address classification concerns. As they were led from the arena under heavy guard, Dr. Selby leaned close to Mara. Did we push too far? We pushed exactly far enough, Mara replied quietly. Look at their posture. They're not threatening us. They're containing us because they're afraid. Is that better? Fear can be the beginning of respect, if handled correctly. For the next 48 hours, the human delegation was confined to a suite of rooms in the neutral zone between the predator and prey wings. Neither one nor the other. A literal manifestation of their contested status. Food was delivered, actual food, not nutrient slop, and they were treated with cautious courtesy by the security staff. Through Delegate Vorith, who visited briefly on the second day, they learned that the council was in continuous session, reviewing not just human classification, but the entire framework of the system that had governed galactic relations for 12 millennia. There are factions forming, Vorith reported. Traditionalists who insist the system must remain unchanged, progressives who see an opportunity for evolution, and pragmatists who simply want stability restored as quickly as possible. And Rakthal? Mara asked. He leads the traditionalists, of course, but his position is not as secure as it once was. The demonstration affected many of the younger council members. On the third day, a formal summons arrived. Mara alone was requested to appear before the Supreme Council in the High Chamber, a venue typically reserved for treaty negotiations and major diplomatic incidents. As she was escorted through the station's most secure corridors, Mara noted subtle changes in how she was treated. The guards maintained professional distance, but there was no longer the casual disregard that had characterized interactions with prey species. Small adjustments, but telling ones. The High Chamber was an imposing space, its architecture designed to emphasize the power of those who governed. The council members, 27 in total, representing the full spectrum of predator classifications, sat in a semicircular arrangement on elevated platforms. At the center, slightly higher than the others, was the seat of the senior arbiter, currently occupied by an ancient leviathan whose tentacles showed the pale striping of extreme age. Administrator Grix stood at a podium below the council, flanked by holographic displays showing Mara's demonstration from multiple angles. Approach, Dr. Mara Lynn of Earth. The senior arbiter's voice resonated through the chamber, translated simultaneously into multiple languages. Mara walked forward and stood on the designated platform, conscious of the hundreds of eyes, some compound, some vertical-slitted, some multifaceted, focused intently on her. The Council has reviewed your demonstration and the accompanying scientific data. The arbiter continued. We have consulted historical records, evolutionary databases, and cultural archives from multiple worlds. There was a pause, heavy with significance. In 12,000 years, the classification system has undergone only 17 major revisions. Each was preceded by extensive debate and required overwhelming consensus. Yet here we are, contemplating the 18th revision after just 3 days of deliberation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Before we proceed, Councillor Rakthal has requested the right to direct inquiry. Mara turned slightly to face the Crimson Hunter, who leaned forward from his elevated position. Dr. Lin, Rakthal began, his voice carefully controlled. Your demonstration showed impressive hunting techniques adapted for primitive conditions. But in the modern era, with advanced technology, such adaptations are surely obsolete. Why should we reclassify based on abilities your species no longer relies upon? It was a clever argument, one that Mara had anticipated. Counselor, does your species still hunt with fang and claw alone? Do you not use spacecraft, energy weapons, and quantum communications? Rokthal's scales shifted slightly, a sign of irritation. We have advanced, of course. As have we, Mara replied. But the classification system is explicitly based on evolutionary history and inherent capabilities, not current technological status. If it were otherwise, most spacefaring species would be classified identically. She stepped closer to the holographic displays, indicating key moments from the demonstration. What humans demonstrated in Arena Delta wasn't just physical capability, it was problem-solving, adaptation, and cooperation. These traits remain central to human civilization, from our scientific methodology to our diplomatic approach. Yet you came alone to the first bite ceremony, Rokthal countered. Where was this vaunted cooperation then? Mara smiled slightly. I came as an observer, to gather data. The ceremony itself was the beginning of our hunt, not for prey, but for understanding. Every action since has been coordinated with my team, building toward a specific goal. The senior arbiter's tentacles rippled, a gesture that silenced further debate. The question before the Council is not whether humans are identical to traditional apex predators. Clearly, they are not. The question is whether our classification system, as currently structured, adequately accounts for species that evolved cooperative hunting strategies and tool use as primary survival mechanisms. The ancient being turned slightly, addressing the full Council. The evidence presented suggests it does not. The traditional binary of predator and prey fails to capture the complexity of evolutionary pathways that produce species like humans, and, we must acknowledge, several other currently misclassified species. This statement caused a stir among the Council members. Mara remained silent, recognizing that the debate had moved beyond her specific case to the larger implications for galactic taxonomy. After several minutes of discussion in multiple languages, some of which Mara's translator couldn't fully process, the senior arbiter raised a primary tentacle for silence. We have reached a preliminary consensus. The classification system will be expanded to include a new category, cooperative apex, species that achieve predator status primarily through collective action, technological adaptation, and strategic intelligence rather than individual hunting prowess. The arbiter turned back to Mara. Humans will be the first species reclassified under this new designation, effective immediately. Administrative protocols and station accommodations will be adjusted accordingly. Mara inclined her head in acknowledgement, careful to maintain diplomatic composure despite the surge of triumph she felt. Furthermore, the arbiter continued, in recognition of your role in bringing this classification error to our attention, the Council appoints you, Dr. Mara Lin, as interspecies liaison for the transition period. You will work with Administrator Grix to implement the necessary changes and to identify other species that may qualify for reclassification. Now, Mara allowed herself a small smile. I am honored by the Council's trust and look forward to working with Administrator Grix. She glanced at the Administrator, whose exoskeletal plates had darkened slightly, a sign of strong emotion, though whether anger, embarrassment, or simply shock was difficult to determine. The formal session concluded with traditional ceremonial phrases, but as Mara was escorted from the high chamber, she could hear the continued buzz of conversation behind her. 12 millennia of taxonomic certainty had been upended in less than a week. The ripple effects would transform interstellar diplomacy for generations to come. 6 months later, Mara sat in her new office in the central administrative section of Station Aurora 9, sipping real coffee, not synthesized, but actual beings imported from Earth at considerable expense. Through the panoramic viewport, she could see the slow dance of ships arriving and departing, their configurations representing dozens of worlds and species classifications. The station itself had undergone significant renovations. The stark division between predator and prey wings had been replaced with a more nuanced arrangement based on environmental preferences rather than taxonomic status. Communal spaces had been redesigned to accommodate mixed groups, and the feeding areas now offered diverse options rather than segregated services. Most significantly, the diplomatic councils were now structured around shared interests and alliance groups rather than evolutionary categories. It wasn't perfect. Centuries of ingrained hierarchy couldn't be dismantled overnight, but it was progress. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Delegate Vorith, now elevated to senior representative for the Verithian Collective. Interspecies Liaison Lin, they greeted her, using her formal title. The Proxima Treaty negotiations have reached a tentative agreement. Your intervention proved decisive. Mara gestured to a chair designed to accommodate Verithian physiology. I merely pointed out the mutual benefits of cooperative resource management. Both sides were ready to listen. 6 months ago, they would not have been, Vorith observed. The old classifications would have prevented meaningful dialogue between the Caridian hives and the Luviathan collectives. Things change, Mara said, taking another sip of her coffee. Sometimes they just need a push in the right direction. Oh, speaking of change, Vorith said, their voice dropping slightly. Counselor Rockthal has requested a private meeting with you. Mara raised an eyebrow. The Crimson Hunter had been notably absent from recent diplomatic functions, retreating to his ancestral territories after the classification revisions were implemented. Did he state the purpose? Officially, to discuss cultural exchange programs between Earth and the Crimson Territories. Unofficially, Vorith made the Verithian gesture for uncertainty. I'll meet with him, Mara decided. Progress requires engagement with traditionalists as well as progressives. After Vorith departed, Mara turned back to the viewport, watching the stars beyond the station's protective field. Her communication pad chimed with a priority message from Earth, the 5th this week. She opened it to find a simple text. Congratulations. Station Aurora 9 now officially recognized as neutral diplomatic territory under the expanded classification accords. Don't start any wars, unless you have to. V. Mara smiled, tapping a brief acknowledgement. Understood. Treaties proceeding as planned. No wars necessary yet. She caught her reflection in the transparent aluminum of the viewport. Still the same xenobiologist who had arrived at this station a year ago. But now something more. A diplomat, a reformer, a bridge between old categories and new possibilities. In the reflection, she could also see the small scar on her left forearm, the mark of the first bite that had started it all. She touched it briefly, remembering the moment she had decided to turn submission into challenge, humiliation into opportunity. Sometimes, you had to let the first predator bite you, so the rest could see what happens after.